Hello and welcome to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller. Today's episode is all about having a good life or a great one. And I wonder, do you want to have a good life or do you want to have a great one? And I want to give you some parameters today, some thoughts around the difference between a good life and a great life. And it comes from some research that I came across a little bit by accident when working on a project that I've been doing. And it's all around this idea about the way we see the transactions of life. It's all about giving and taking and matching. And I want to talk to you today about how you see the whole role of giving. And I don't mean giving money, okay? I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about the concept of giving of our time and how it can be a strategic tool for our success and happiness and well-being, but not all kinds of giving are equal. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Something that we can build into our life that moves it from being a good life into a great life. So I wonder whether you have worked with people where you feel like all they want to do is be transactional about how much they do. They will, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. Or maybe you've worked with people that selflessly give of themselves to the point that actually they are on the verge of burning out. Perhaps you've had a boss in the past who you feel like all they do actually is take, but they aren't giving anything back. And Adam Grant, in his book, which is called Give and Take, is all about analysing these different kinds of interactions we have with people and how they affect our quality of life and the outcomes that we have. And it's such a fascinating piece of research that I would love to dig into with you today. So we're going to start by thinking about who we are. As we always do, as I always do when I'm coaching people, we have to look at who we are and where we are right now. So Adam Grant talks about these types of reciprocity styles, okay? How do we see the giving and taking of life? And he categorizes people into three different categories. He says that you are either a giver, a matcher, or a taker. So let's talk about each of those. And I want you, as you're listening to me, to be really honest with yourself about this and what you tend to fall into. And in any given environment, what do you think you fall into? So we've got the givers, okay? The givers are obviously something that we would aspire to. Givers will contribute selflessly into a situation. So when that's at home, they might selflessly choose to take on a lion's share of stuff that needs to be done. They are not thinking about whether they will get something back in return. Some givers are strategic about this and they're able to do it in a way that feels with boundary. Some givers just give and give and give, and we're going to come back to those two types of givers in a moment. Then we have got the matchers. Matchers are people who are all about, well, I'll do this and you can do this. It's all about fairness, if I load the dishwasher, you can empty it, which, by the way, isn't a bad thing. But matchers are obsessing really around this idea of fairness and equality. They want a balance between giving and taking, and they're willing to help as long as it's reciprocated, okay? There is this reciprocity of expectation that I'll do this, but I will be expecting something back in return. Sometimes these are people who will keep a bit of a record, There's, people I know where they're like, they'll do something, but they'll kind of hold it so that you know that you're going to owe that back. It could be seen as fair and balanced, but there is definitely a matching expectation that matchers have. And we can definitely see the good in that, right? Do we think it's better to be a matcher than to be somebody who just gives and gets nothing back? Well, hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. And then we've got takers. Takers are looking to maximize what they can get. It's quite obvious. They're thinking, this is what I need. This is what I desire. I would like to have as much as I can from this interaction, and I'm going to contribute back as little as possible. They probably get somewhere with this. There's a competitiveness about this. There's a self-serving nature around this. But there isn't the reciprocity of, you've done this for me, I'm going to do this for you. And, if I think about some of the work interactions I have, I definitely meet people in these different categories. You can meet matches where you feel like, in fact, I got an email just recently from somebody saying, do you remember when we talked about this? I wondered whether you could do this for me, and there was a bit of a feeling of matching in the way the email was written. And then I have definitely met takers where you can feel like they are looking for a way to exploit connections that you've got or things that you might be able to do for them. And there is no feeling in them that they might do something back for you. And I also have the privilege to meet some incredible givers. Now, to be fair, some of these givers are well-established individuals who have the privilege of being able to give. But I do meet some wonderful people who will hold the door open, so to speak. They will find opportunities to support you and use the situations that they find themselves in to selflessly give. I actually had dinner with a chair recently, and he was, so generous in his time, in the conversation. He was willing, partly through the fact that he was far on in his career, that actually he wasn't looking for anything in return from me. It was just generosity and giving. And yes, you could say he was in the life phase to do so, but he didn't have to. He didn't have to make that decision. And I recognise that this was just somebody whose outlook is such that he recognised that this works. It works to be this kind of person. It works because it's good for me, and it works because it's good for the people around me. And so, first of all, as you're listening, I wonder whether you feel like you're a giver, a matcher, or a taker, and what happens when you're under pressure, what happens when you're in competitive environments, what happens at work, what happens at home. I would love to say that I'm a giver. I feel like there are things I do that are giving things to do. But I would also be honest and say there are times when I know I've kept a record of that. And I've felt like it hasn't been either appreciated or what about what I might need in return. And there is something so lovely when you meet somebody who gives and you just know that there is no expectation that there'll be something in return or that, this will work out fairly. They kind of can see the good in the act in the long range view, regardless of whether with that person there's a quid pro quo about it or not. And I'm not saying I'm never that person. There are times when I can give and be much more able to do that and to just say I can afford this generosity. I don't mean of money, although that is part of this. It's often time, mentoring or connections and so on and so forth. And I can't say I've never been a taker. There are times when I do. There are times when I feel like I am just looking for what is going to work for me, especially when you know that you are, you might even feel like I'm taking here because there's nothing I can give to this person. So I don't think it's a case of like you are this one thing and you never are the others, but there are sort of modes that maybe we move between. I don't like it when I'm taking, and I don't like it when I find myself moving into a matching kind of mode. I like it best when I am giving. Now, the thing is, if you've thought about this and you think about your own personality, if you think about your own values, it's going to shape the way you see giving. And I just want to just remind you, for the sake of clarity, I am talking about giving in a wide sense of the word. So it could be giving that you get an email from someone at work who says, would you be able to meet me for lunch? I would love to pick your brains on X, Y, Z. Or it could be somebody who says, would you be willing to spend some time on this project and support me in such and such, or help me prepare for an interview? There's 1,000,001 different ways we can give. I am not actually really talking about finances, although obviously that is around a whole spirit of generosity to the world around us. So if we then move from this, if we've realised who we are and we realise how we do this, I want to alert you to two types of givers. So I've said to you there are takers, there are matchers, but actually the giver section has really got two types of givers. Let's call them selfless givers or otherish givers, okay? And I'm going to explain the difference between the two. Selfless givers are people who are giving of nature, all the good things that we've talked about, but they are so selfless that they are doing it without any strategy, without any boundary, and they are highly likely to find themselves burning out. So if we think about the overcommitted episode that we had, or you think about the toxic productivity episode that we had, a selfless giver is going to be that person who sees the role of giving and knows it's important and knows that it's good for life, it's a good thing, but they have taken that to a degree that is unhealthy. They are saying yes to everything and they are potentially going to burn out because of it. So a selfless giver, to the extreme, to use Adam Grant's language, has completely sacrificed of themselves. They are at every opportunity saying, well, it's important to give, so they do that without any boundary. Someone asks for help and they always say yes. It's the sort of person who, I don't know, works as a nurse, but every single day does 2 to 3 hours overtime, every single day. On top of maybe even a 10 to 12 hour shift. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here. Somebody, for every request they get, it's always a yes, I can do that. Yes, I can help. Now, Adam Grant talks about a different type of giver. And rather than calling them selfless, he calls them otherish givers. Otherish. This is his word for it. And these people are givers, they are altruistic people, but they also have clarity around their own ambition and life goals. So these people are very happy to give, but they have learned how to give for the greatest impact. So they've learned, like, what are the ways I should be giving? What are the things that I do best? What are the ways I can best be a giver? Rather than giving all and sundry, every situation, every time they're asked. They have successfully understood that they don't have to say yes to everything. They learn how to give when they can have the greatest impact. That doesn't mean greatest impact for them necessarily. That's not what I'm saying, but that it's a really important opportunity to give. And so an otherish giver is somebody who has a desire to give without necessarily having anything in return, but they are choosing to give in the most impactful ways at the most impactful moments, rather than at every opportunity. And even as I'm talking to you about Adam Grant's work, I'm thinking, gosh, you know, am I an otherish giver? Like when I'm being a giver, or am I just a bit scattergun about the stuff that I'm doing? Have I got like a strategic mind around what it looks like for me to be most helpful with my giving? Like, who do I give my time to? What sort of things do I do best, which is therefore how I should be giving? You know, if you find yourself at work signing up for all these different like extra opportunities or different committees to sit on, and you're doing all of them and you'll say yes, 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 or in your private life you're on the PTA and you're on the governing body and you're doing all these different things, but they don't even really suit your strengths and personality, you could argue that that is selfless giver rather than otherish giver. Finding those things that really, really should be you. Now, what was so interesting about Adam Grant's research, and this is the bit I want you to hear, is that what he did was he was looking at leaders and looking at cultures of companies to see whether givers, matchers, or takers were the most successful people. Because he was looking actually at the research around this, not just this idea around, oh, it's nice to be a giver. Have we got any evidence that givers actually also succeed? Because I would love to say that givers succeed, but if you look at the world around you, you'll see that there's a lot of takers that seem to succeed in all kinds of different ways, and adds complexity to this. So he looked at leaders across large organisations and he looked at their sort of impact over time. Now, what was so interesting about Adam Grant research is that givers fell to the bottom. They fell right to the bottom, and sort of takers came to the top and matchers were somewhere in the middle. And that's a bit of a gutting thing for me to tell you, is that givers went to the bottom. But when you looked at it more closely, you actually realised that givers fell to the bottom and givers rose to the top. And it was as you looked more closely at the difference between a selfless giver and an otherish giver, you realised the difference. And the selfless givers fell to the bottom of the pile, and the otherish givers rose above all the other groups. And so there is a way to be a giver and to be somebody who is generous without a scorecard, willing to support people with no sort of agenda behind that. They're not looking to maximize what they can get. They are wanting to give over and above. They're not even looking for it to be transactional. I'll do this, but only if you do this, and we've got a quid pro quo situation going on. That these people are actually the most successful. I think that is amazing news for the world. I don't think we have enough of people like this, but I think it's fantastic for us to have some evidence on how we do that. So I hope now, as you're listening to this, you think, oh, it's good to be a giver. It's good to be a person who gives. You know, we're almost being encouraged these days to be really, self-focused, when actually, or being a matcher, you do things at work, but you make sure you're going to get something back for it. A otherish giver is not looking for something in return, but they are strategically placing their generosity where they can have the greatest impact rather than everywhere. So if we really know our values, if we really know what matters to us, they are not just for personal success, they should serve others. So if I've got a value of family, okay, let's say one of my values is family, if I just pour into my children with that family value, that is actually quite a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's quite a selfish way for me to live out that value, to be honest, because I'm going to benefit by that. But if I take a wider view of the word family and think, let's make a family unit that is generous and hospitable to others, so they can either potentially live with us or have dinner with us, or once a week we can have an open table where other people can join us. That is otherish giving, using my values to drive my giving to have maximum impact. And so as you're listening to this, I would really love you to think about doing something. Have a think about deciding or looking at what your top values are for your life, and then thinking about what does an expanded view of your values look like that involves this otherish giving. How can you use it in a way that has an impact that's beyond you, but it's not just scattergun impact, it's something that really is in the area of your strengths, personality, values. So I know somebody who runs a community choir, and that person is a really musical individual. So what they're doing is they're using their strengths and talents, their joys, their values of creativity, and as well as it's serving their own good, they're doing something with it that has this bigger benefit for the society and community around them. But actually, it's a win-win kind of otherish giving, which will probably open doors of opportunity for that individual because of the leadership that they have shown and demonstrated in that space. So a matcher, to remind you, will only give if they get something in return. A taker is using their values to gain power or status. But an otherish giver is using their values to place their generosity where it has the greatest impact. I wonder how you use your values and personality at the moment. Do you use them to take, to match, or to give? And if you are giving, are you giving in that strategic way where it's of the most help? Or are you giving in a way without plan or process that just leaves you at the potential of being completely burnt out and taken for granted? I think it's so interesting to think about this and think about how it plays out. And I do want to talk about generosity as well in a moment in lines with this. But before I do, I just wanted to play out a couple of scenarios with you. If you are a selfless giver, there's some things that you need to do about it. So if you're one of these people who is a giver, but you are not otherish, you have got to learn to say no strategically. You know, we've talked about this a lot. You've got to decide what it is you're going to say yes to, what it is you're going to say no to. I love the Grant mindset of I will give when I can have the greatest impact. If you're not going to be having the greatest impact, this is not the place for you to be doing it. You need to prioritize where you're giving so that it truly makes a difference. Ask yourself, am I helping in a way that's sustainable for me and meaningful? I think if you are a giver, you need to also recognize the takers in your life. Not everyone is going to deserve your generosity. And I think sometimes we have to say no to people there is no reciprocity and redirect our generosity in the right places. Another scenario that I wanted us to consider was if you are working with somebody who's an absolute matcher. Maybe you've got somebody on your team and, to all intents and purposes, they're doing a great job, but they are absolutely fairness orientated. I will only give this if this person gives this. It's transactional, and although it's reasonable, it sort of curtails generosity to this sort of give, take, quid pro quo. I'll only do this because you did this. Let me give you a few tips to think about them. I think we have to just be different and could try and create a different culture. I think one of the important things we can do is to model the behaviour that we think is different and not get sucked into, well, I'm going to be transactional too. I would just do the thing, do the generosity that hasn't got any immediate payback, and just continue to be that person. And I think you can help that person see the bigger picture. I think it can be so helpful if we can, create cultures where we're reminding people actually that true generosity without this transactional nature builds trust and influence and long-term success. And actually sharing some of this Adam Grant research with matchers could be really helpful for them to see the difference and the shift. And I think maybe another way of thinking about a matcher is how could we use their personality and use their strengths in a different way? Perhaps they are really into fairness. So perhaps they could be somebody who really challenges the takers and holds takers accountable. Perhaps there are ways that they could be encouraged to be part of the fairness at work without this leaning into this overtly transactional way. And the final thing I wanted to think about, well, actually not the final, but another thing I wanted to think about is if you have a leader or a boss who's a taker. Some of us have really generous self-giving bosses around us, but you might have a boss who you feel like is a bit of a taker. They're asking a lot of you and they don't give a lot back. I think there are a few things we need to do there. I think one thing is we need to protect our work. Do keep a record of the things that you're doing, even for yourself, so that you've got a bit of an aid memoir of this is how I've contributed. Because actually it might be that people are passing off your work as theirs. That's a taking thing to do. They're not sharing the credit. They are just really putting their name to things. I think doing what you can to have a documentation that will enable you to have your work recognised in the long run is important. I think we should be strategic with a taker. I think it's important that we continue to give and not be modelled by their behaviour. But I also think there are other people probably around you that you can give more to, who there is going to be a better culture around. I think it's finding other allies across the organisation, and maybe you have to do a bit of managing up. And I, by the way, want to do an episode on how to manage up because it's a massive issue. A lot of management talk is about what we do to manage the people that we're responsible for. But so much of workplace management is how we manage those that we are managed by. And I think sometimes we might need to try and appeal to that taker, helping them to see how what they're doing can help the team, but also help them. You might even need to reframe things sometimes and say, if you are able to do this and be a bit more reciprocal, you're going to get this done faster. It's going to be more efficient. And I do think you've got to think about how much of a taking environment that you can be in. I think if it's too taking and too sort of toxic, you've got to think about an exit strategy over time. You are not going to necessarily be able to change the personality of a boss that doesn't want to hear it, but you can potentially affect some of the culture right around you, and you have to decide whether this is somewhere where you want to be. And these things play out in the home as well. You might be married or live with a partner who is a real matcher. You might be married to a partner who is an absolute selfless giver, or you might be married to someone who's a total taker. And this research by Adam Grant might give you the language that you need to help you frame a conversation in a way that feels a bit more open, a bit less combative, and a way of owning your own stuff. Because as I've gone through this stuff, as I've looked at the work of Adam Grant, I have been challenged myself. I definitely, especially when I'm stretched, I can start to think about the things that I have done, or be thinking, well, you should do this because I did this. And it's never helpful to fall into that. It just makes me quite small-minded. It's not something that actually brings out the best in me. You might feel that it's fair and right for me to do it, but is it bringing me a good life or a great life? It's definitely not moving me to the great life. So I think my encouragement to you is that if you find yourself in that giving space and others aren't, reframe it and think, actually, this is just better way to live. It's a better way to live. Yes, some of this might not feel totally fair, but living like this is going to give me over time the better life with the better outcomes, and a peace of mind that doesn't come with being a matcher or being a taker. I just want to quickly end on a little bit about generosity. And again, this is a podcast in itself, but giving and being generous is good for you. And that is not just something that I'm telling you. It's not always something I want to do, but all the research out there suggests that people who are generous, as well as everything Adam Grant's already told us, live better lives. A meta-analysis of 100 different studies found that caring for others, like the giving to others, just increases our own well-being. Again, that's not without boundary. That's not without any sort of checks and balances in place, but it does give us a better life. When we do things that are generous and good for others, actually it's a buffer against stress and negative emotions. We get something called a giver's high. It's a known thing that happens. And so that acts as another layer of protection against the stresses and the negativity around us. Sometimes I can feel quite overwhelmed by how difficult things are, both like on a personal level or the things around me, or if I engage with too much news. And actually, when I choose to do something generous and open-handed, it's a way of almost putting a deposit back for me, even though I'm doing something for someone else. A Gallup study found that 9 out of 10 people had an emotional boost from helping others. I can think of so many stories from my own life where we've done things like secretly or have been part of teams that have done things. In fact, I saw something on socials the other day. This isn't my story, but some friends of ours, the husband in this couple has been really unwell for the last year. It's been difficult to diagnose exactly what's going on, but this is a person with high energy, high positivity, who's found themselves spending most of this year in a wheelchair. And a whole group of friends spent the weekend just attacking their garden for them. It wasn't done in a matching way. Well, we've done your garden, so you can come and help ours. It was just, we're going to give you our weekend. And all of the people involved in that, they not only got to see like the fruit of their labour, they got to see the garden turn around. They got this emotional boost that was good for their well-being, for choosing to spend their time doing something for someone else with no expectation of anything in return. And the people who I know who live like that are living the biggest and most full lives around the place. So if you are listening and you are more of a giver, and my hunch is most of my listeners probably fall into that category with a smidge of selfless giving that they need to get under control and probably a little bit of matching. If you are one of those people and you're listening, and maybe you're feeling a bit downcast, maybe you're feeling like, oh, the takers are the ones that get everything, I just want to remind you that that's not true. Learn to be an otherish giver and learn to be strategic about having the greatest impact. Then you are putting the conditions in place for it not only to be absolutely great for everyone around you, but to enable you to live a great life too. And if we were all otherish givers, if everyone was one of those, what a different world we would live in. So I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear the challenges around this. I'd love to hear how it plays out for you at work and at home, and how challenged you're feeling around this idea of not even looking for reciprocity. Drop us a line. You can get in touch with me at hannah@hellosidekick.co. And we'd love you to share this podcast far and wide, because it helps us to continue to put this content out there. Thanks for listening today.